My daughter-in-law took my grandson to her brother's wedding without me, and 3 hours into that wedding, my phone rang from inside a bathroom stall, and the voice on the other end wasn't crying. It was whispering, and what my grandson said to me in that whisper is the reason I am sitting here today telling you this story, because after that phone call, I stopped being the sweet, quiet grandmother everyone thought they could walk over, and I became something else entirely. Before I go any further, I want to know who's listening to me right now. Tell me where you're from, drop your city in the comments. I read every single one of them, I really do. And if you love your grandmother, if she ever stood in your corner when nobody else would, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Now let me tell you what happened. My name is Judith Hargrove. I am 68 years old, and I have exactly one son, Adam, and exactly one grandson, Wyatt, who is 7 years old and who I love more than my own life. Adam married a woman named Danielle Foster 9 years ago, and from the very first dinner I ever had with that woman, I felt something cold sitting across the table from me, wearing a smile like a mask that never quite fit her face. I want to be fair here because I always try to be fair, even when it costs me something. Danielle is not a stupid woman. She is sharp, she is organized. She runs her household like a general runs a campaign. And for years I told myself that maybe that coldness I felt was just my own jealousy, an old woman clinging too tight to her only son. I told myself that so many times that I almost believed it. But a mother knows things. A mother feels things in her bones long before her mind is willing to admit them. When Wyatt was born, I drove 3 hours every single weekend to see that baby. I didn't ask permission. I didn't need to. Adam wanted me there. And for the first 2 years, Danielle tolerated me the way you tolerate weather you can't control. I babysat, I brought food, I stitched together a quilt with Wyatt's name on it that took me 4 months to finish. I was there for his first steps. I was there when he said his first word. And it wasn't Mama, and it wasn't Dada. It was Nana. And I still remember the look on Danielle's face when she heard it. A look that told me everything I needed to know about how this woman kept score. From that day forward, something shifted. Small things at first. She'd forget to tell me about doctor's appointments. She'd reschedule our weekends without asking, always with some excuse that sounded reasonable, on its own but added up to something else entirely when you stacked them together. Adam, God love him, is a good man but a blind one when it comes to his wife. He works long hours, he trusts her completely, and he has never once, in 9 years, questioned a single decision she makes about that boy. I kept my mouth shut. I told myself that a grandmother's job is to love quietly, to never compete with the mother, to accept whatever scraps of time you're given, and be grateful for them. I have watched other grandmothers destroy their relationships with their grandchildren because they couldn't stop fighting with the daughter-in-law, and I swore I would never be that woman. So I bit my tongue again and again and again. There were birthdays where I found out about the party from a photo posted online instead of an invitation. There was a Christmas where Danielle decided, quietly and without discussion, that the family would spend the holiday with her side only that year, and Adam simply went along with it because keeping peace at home mattered more to him than a single holiday with his mother. There was a school play I drove 3 hours for, only to be told at the door that seating was family only and that I should have arranged it with Danielle ahead of time, as if I were some distant acquaintance, instead of the woman who had rocked that child to sleep more nights than I could count. Each time I told myself it was small. Each time I told myself that fighting over it would only prove her right, would only give her a story to tell. Adam about the difficult mother-in-law who couldn't respect boundaries. So I swallowed every single one of those moments, filed them away somewhere quiet, and kept showing up with casseroles and birthday presents and a smile, because I believed, truly believed, that love meant absorbing whatever was handed to me without complaint. What I did not understand back then, what took me 68 years and 1 phone call from a bathroom stall to finally understand, is that absorbing cruelty quietly does not protect the people you love. It only teaches the person doing the hurting that they can keep going, that there will never be a consequence, that the woman on the other end of every slight will simply keep smiling and showing up no matter what she's handed. I was not protecting my family by staying silent. I was training Danielle, one small silence at a time, to believe that nothing she did would ever cost her anything. But there is only so much a person can swallow before it starts eating them from the inside. 2 months ago, Danielle's younger brother, Cole, announced his wedding. A big affair out at some vineyard venue 2 hours outside the city. The kind of wedding with a hashtag and a seating chart designed by a professional. I was, of course, not invited, which stung but which I understood. Weddings are for family and close friends, and I am Wyatt's grandmother, not Danielle's family by blood. I made peace with that. What I did not make peace with, what I could not make peace with, was finding out through a photo on Danielle's social media that Wyatt was going, that my 7-year-old grandson, who I had watched every single week of his life since the day he came home from the hospital, was going to be at this wedding. 3 hours away, overnight, in a hotel, without me knowing a single detail, without anyone telling me a single thing. I called Adam, he didn't know either. That's the part that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. My own son didn't know his wife had booked a hotel room for their child 2 hours away, for an entire weekend. When he asked her about it, she said it was just easier if she handled the logistics herself since he'd be working that Saturday anyway, and that I wasn't really part of the plan, because the trip was already tight on people and space in the car, not part of the plan. My grandson, going to be around strangers and cousins he barely knew, sleeping in a hotel room that wasn't his own bed, for 2 full days, and I wasn't even told until I stumbled across a picture online of him in a little suit that I didn't buy, standing next to people I didn't recognize. I said nothing more to Adam. I have learned over the years that saying too much, too soon only gives people time to build their defenses. So I smiled. I told him it was fine. Family should get to celebrate together. And inside I felt something harden into a stone that sat right behind my ribs. The wedding was on a Saturday. I spent that whole day doing ordinary things, folding laundry, watering my garden, trying not to check my phone every 4 minutes like some anxious teenager. Around 6 in the evening, my phone rang. It was Wyatt's number, the little tablet Adam had set up for him, with a video calling app just for emergencies and for calling Grandma. I answered immediately, the way I always do. And for a moment, there was nothing but breathing, quiet, shaky breathing, and then a whisper, so soft I had to press the phone hard against my ear to catch it. "Nana," he said, "I'm in the bathroom. Don't tell Mommy I called you." My heart dropped straight through the floor. I asked him as calmly as I could manage what was wrong, why he was hiding in a bathroom to call me. He told me that he'd been left at the kids' table with cousins he'd never met, that nobody was watching him, that he'd gotten scared during the loud music and gone looking for his mom, and found her outside with a group of people, laughing, a drink in her hand, and when he tugged on her dress and told her he was scared and wanted to go back to the hotel, she'd looked down at him and told him, in front of everyone, to stop being such a baby and to go back inside and sit down, that this was her brother's night, not his. My 7-year-old grandson locked himself in a bathroom stall at a wedding, alone, scared, and crying so quietly that no one heard him, because the one thing he was more afraid of than being alone was making his mother angry at him for interrupting her fun, and the only person he thought to call, the only person in this entire world he trusted enough to whisper to from behind a locked door was me. I told him I was coming. I don't remember making the decision. I don't remember grabbing my keys or my purse. I just remember being in my car, driving faster than I have driven in 20 years, my hands shaking on the wheel, tears streaming down my face, that stone behind my ribs turning into something with teeth. I called Adam on the way. He picked up on the second ring, and I did not waste time being gentle. I told him exactly what Wyatt had told me, word for word, and I heard something in my son's voice break in a way I had never heard before. He said he was leaving work immediately. I told him I would beat him there, and I did. 2 hours felt like 20. I don't remember the drive except in fragments. A gas station where I didn't stop, headlights blurring through my tears, my own voice talking to myself in the empty car, telling myself to stay calm, to think clearly, because a woman who arrives at a wedding in a rage gives everyone an excuse to call her hysterical, and I refused. I absolutely refused to give Danielle Foster that satisfaction. I arrived at that vineyard just as the sun was setting, string lights glowing over a dance floor full of people who had no idea what was about to happen. I found the front desk of the venue, and because I am, when I need to be, a very calm and very convincing woman, I explained that my grandson was a guest and that I needed to see him, that it was urgent, family matter, A young woman working the event walked me toward the reception hall, and that's when I saw him. Wyatt was sitting alone at a table full of empty chairs, his little suit jacket off, sitting in a pile of cake crumbs and half-empty cups, staring at nothing, his eyes red and swollen. Not one adult was near him, not one. I did not run to him the way I wanted to, because I did not want to scare him or draw attention before I had a plan. I walked calmly, knelt down in front of him, and the moment he saw my face, he threw himself into my arms and sobbed. Really sobbed, the kind of sobbing a child does when they've been holding it together for hours and finally feel safe enough to fall apart. I held him. I let him cry as long as he needed. And while I held my grandson, I looked up, and across that reception hall, through a crowd of strangers in their finest clothes, I found Danielle. She was laughing at something someone said, a glass of champagne in her hand, completely unaware, or perhaps simply unbothered, that her son had been alone and crying for who knows how long while she celebrated 20 feet away. I stood up, took Wyatt's hand, and walked straight toward her. People noticed. You could feel the room shift, the way a room does when it senses something is about to happen. Danielle saw me coming, and her smile faltered for just a second before she rebuilt it. That same mask I'd been staring at for 9 years. Judith, she said, what are you doing here? I did not raise my voice. I want you to understand that, because everyone always expects the grandmother in these stories to scream and make a scene, and I refuse to become that story. Instead, I spoke quietly, clearly, in a voice that I have used exactly a handful of times in my life, a voice that made grown men listen when I was a young woman working in a world that didn't want to hear from women at all. Your son called me from a bathroom stall an hour ago, whispering, because he was scared to let you know he needed help. I found him alone at that table, crying, while you were out here with a drink in your hand. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer it in front of all these people. Where were you? The music didn't stop, but the conversations around us did. I felt eyes on us, felt phones quietly lifting, felt the particular electric silence of a crowd that senses a story unfolding in real time. Danielle's face went through several colors, and she reached for my arm, trying to pull me aside, to handle this quietly, privately, the way she had handled every inconvenient truth about herself for years. I did not let her pull me aside. I have spent 9 years being pulled aside, being managed, being handled like a problem instead of treated like family, and I was done. No, I said. We're not doing this quietly anymore. You told a 7-year-old boy to stop being a baby when he came to you scared. You left him alone at a wedding 2 hours from home, in a hotel with a lock code you didn't even give to his father. You didn't invite me, which is your right, but you didn't tell anyone, including your own husband, that his son would be alone with strangers for 2 days. And tonight, while your son sat crying by himself, you were laughing over there with a drink. So I'll ask again, where were you? Adam arrived right then, having driven like a man possessed, and the sight of him walking into that reception hall, jaw tight, eyes locked on his wife, changed everything. Because Adam is a quiet man, a patient man, a man who has spent 9 years giving his wife the benefit of every doubt. But there is a particular kind of fury that comes from a gentleman finally reaching his limit, and everyone in that room felt it the second he crossed the threshold. He didn't yell either. He walked straight to Wyatt, picked him up, held him tight, and only then did he look at his wife. You told our son to stop being a baby, he said. Not a question, a statement, because I had already told him everything on the phone. And you left him alone. Danielle tried to explain. She said the words every person says when they've been caught, that it wasn't like that he was fine, that kids exaggerate, that I was making a scene, that this wasn't the place. But her own brother, the groom Cole, had been standing close enough to hear the whole exchange, and I watched his face change too, watched him look at his sister with something between disbelief and disgust, because even he, her own blood, could see that there was no version of this story where she came out looking innocent. I want to tell you that I felt satisfied in that moment, watching her unravel in front of everyone she'd invited to witness the happiest day of her brother's life. But mostly what I felt was tired and sad and grateful, so deeply grateful, that my grandson had trusted me enough to call, that he had a nana who would drive 2 hours through tears just to hold him. We did not stay for the rest of the wedding. Adam carried Wyatt out to the car, I followed behind, and Danielle stood frozen in that reception hall, champagne glass still in her hand, watching her husband and son walk out without her. Cole, her own brother, the groom himself, came running after us into the parking lot, still in his wedding suit, and grabbed Adam's arm gently to stop him for just a moment. I expected him to defend his sister, to ask us to come back inside and not make a scene at his wedding, and I braced myself for that conversation. Instead, he apologized. He told Adam he was sorry, that he hadn't realized Wyatt had been alone that long, that he'd seen him at the kids' table earlier and assumed someone was watching him, and that he felt sick knowing his own nephew had been sitting there crying while everyone celebrated 20 feet away. He hugged Wyatt goodbye, told him he loved him, and told Adam that whatever needed to happen after tonight, he understood, and that he would not hold it against any of us for leaving. That small act of decency from Cole, in the middle of all that ugliness, is something I have never forgotten, because it reminded me that not every branch of that family tree had grown the same way. That night began the real reckoning, though, and this is the part I know some of you have been waiting for, because a whisper from a bathroom stall is not where a story like this ends, it's only where it begins. In the weeks that followed, Adam did not simply forgive and forget the way he always had before. Something in him had genuinely broken, in the way that glass breaks quietly, from a crack that had been forming for years before it finally gave. He moved into the guest room. He started picking Wyatt up from school himself every single day, without telling Danielle his schedule in advance the way she had never told anyone hers. He started asking questions about things he'd never questioned before, about where the money went, about who Wyatt spent time with, about a pattern of small cruelties that, once he started looking, he found everywhere, in old messages, in things Wyatt had said in passing that Adam had never thought twice about until now. I did not push him toward divorce. I want to be honest with you, because I don't believe in tearing families apart out of spite, even when spite would feel wonderful. But I also did not protect Danielle from the consequences of her own choices, not this time, not ever again. When Adam asked me what I thought he should do, I told him the truth. I told him that a mother who tells her frightened son to stop being a baby is not a mother who is simply having a bad night. I told him that pattern matters more than any single moment, and that he needed to look honestly at 9 years of patterns instead of one apology after one bad wedding. Danielle tried everything to smooth it over. She showed up at my house 3 days later, something she had never once done in 9 years of marriage to my son, and stood on my porch with red eyes and a shaking voice, asking me to talk to Adam, to tell him it was all a misunderstanding, that she loved Wyatt more than anything, that I was turning her own husband against her. I let her stand on that porch for a long moment before I answered. I told her that I had spent 9 years being polite while she pushed me further and further from my grandson's life. 9 years of small cancellations and forgotten invitations, and a coldness dressed up as boundaries, and that I had said nothing because I did not want to be the mother-in-law who ruins a marriage. But I told her that the moment she told a scared 7-year-old to stop being a baby, she had done something I could not stay quiet about, not for her comfort, not for the sake of peace, not for anything. I told her I did not hate her. That part is true. I do not carry hatred well. It sits too heavy in an old body. But I told her that respect, once broken the way she broke it that night, does not simply rebuild itself because she cried on a porch, and that if she wanted her marriage and her son's trust back, she was going to have to earn every single piece of it, the hard way, starting with real change, not apologies. She left my porch that day angry, and I understand that anger. Nobody likes being told the truth about themselves. But I was not finished, not yet, because there was one more thing I needed to do, one more piece of this that had nothing to do with forgiveness and everything to do with making sure a night like that could never happen again. I sat Adam down at my kitchen table a week later, the same table where I had fed that boy applesauce as a baby, and I told my son something I had never said to him in his entire life. I told him that I was not asking him to divorce his wife. That was not my decision to make and never would be. But I told him that as long as I was alive and breathing, I would not sit quietly by ever again while decisions were made about my grandson's safety without my knowledge, and that if he wanted me involved in Wyatt's life the way I had always been, certain things needed to change immediately, not eventually, not after another year of small silences. I told him I wanted an emergency contact update at Wyatt's school, adding my name back onto every form, something Danielle had quietly removed 2 years earlier without telling either of us. I told him I wanted a shared calendar, something simple, where every trip, every overnight, every plan involving that boy was visible to all three of us. No more finding out through a photograph online. And I told him gently but firmly that if he ever needed somewhere to go, if things at home ever became unsafe or unbearable for him or for Wyatt, my door and my guest room would always be open, no questions asked, no judgment day or night. Adam cried at that table, a grown man of 36 years old, crying at his mother's kitchen table because for the first time in 9 years, someone had said out loud what he had felt but never had the words for. He told me he had spent years making himself small in his own marriage, telling himself that peace mattered more than truth, the same way I had spent years telling myself that silence was love. We had both been doing the same thing, in our own ways, for our own reasons, and neither of us had realized how much it was costing the people we were trying to protect. That conversation changed something in him. He went home that night and, for the first time, laid out clear expectations with Danielle instead of quietly absorbing whatever she decided. He told her that Wyatt's safety and his trust were not negotiable, that the days of managing information and controlling who knew what were over, that if she wanted their marriage to survive this, it would have to be built on honesty instead of convenience. Over the months that followed, something did shift. Whether it was fear of losing Adam entirely, or fear of losing her son's trust, or something more honest finally cracking open inside her, I cannot say for certain, and I don't pretend to read hearts I can't see into. What I can tell you is that she started showing up differently. She started calling me before events instead of after. She started asking Wyatt what he needed instead of assuming she already knew. She went on her own without Adam pushing her, to talk to someone, a counselor, about the kind of mother she wanted to be versus the kind of mother she had been raised by. Because it turns out, and this took months for her to say out loud to me, that her own mother had done far worse to her at weddings and gatherings than what she had done to Wyatt, and she had simply never stopped the pattern, only repeated it in a slightly smaller, slightly crueler shape. I am not going to sit here and tell you I forgave her overnight, because that would be a lie, and I promised myself a long time ago that I would never lie to the people who take the time to listen to me. It took the better part of a year. It took watching her, week after week, choose Wyatt over her own convenience, choose honesty over managing appearances, choose to call me and include me instead of quietly writing me out of the picture the way she had for so long. There was one more moment, one that I think about more than any other, that told me the change in Danielle was real and not just a performance for my benefit. About 8 months after that wedding, there was another family gathering, a cousin's birthday party, nothing important, nothing that should have mattered as much as it did. Danielle called me 2 full weeks in advance, not to ask permission, but simply to include me the way family should include family, and she said something I will remember until the day I die. She said, "Judith, I want you to know I put your name on the list of people who can pick Wyatt up if anything happens and I can't be reached. I should have done that years ago. I'm sorry it took what it took." It was a small sentence. It cost her nothing to say and everything to mean. But I understood hearing it, that she had finally crossed some invisible line inside herself. The line between managing an old woman's feelings and actually valuing an old woman's place in her son's life. I told her thank you, and I meant it. And for the first time in 9 years, I hung up the phone feeling something close to peace instead of that familiar tight knot of being tolerated rather than wanted. At that birthday party, I watched her differently than I ever had before. I watched her kneel down to Wyatt's level when he came to her upset about a broken toy, watched her ask him what he needed instead of telling him what he should feel, watched her glance over at me more than once, checking, including the way a daughter checks in with a mother she respects. It was such a small thing, and yet it was everything I had wanted for 9 long years, and it had taken a bathroom stall and a whisper to get there. I will not pretend the road since then has been perfectly smooth, because real families are never perfectly smooth, and any grandmother telling you otherwise is not telling you the truth. There have been arguments since, disagreements about parenting, about holidays, about how much time is enough time, but they are different arguments now, arguments had out loud, at kitchen tables in front of each other, instead of decisions made in silence and discovered later through a photograph online. That difference, the difference between silence and honesty, has changed everything about how our family functions. And I believe, truly believe, it has changed the kind of mother Danielle is becoming for Wyatt, and the kind of father Adam has become as well. Because watching his wife change gave him permission to stop making himself small too. I think often about what would have happened if I had never answered that phone call. Or worse, if Wyatt had never felt safe enough to make it in the first place. Children learn very young who is safe to call when they are frightened. And they learn it not from what we say to them, but from how we respond in the moments that actually matter. If I had lectured him about interrupting the wedding, if I had told him to toughen up and go back to the party, if I had done anything other than drop everything and drive 2 hours through my own tears to hold him, I believe he would have learned that night that even his Nana could not be counted on. And that is a lesson I never want any child to learn about any adult in their life, ever. Wyatt is 9 years old now. He still calls me Nana, still calls me first when something scares him, and though thankfully he hasn't needed to whisper from a bathroom stall since that night, because his mother has never again put him in a position where a bathroom stall felt like the safest place in the building. Adam and Danielle are still married, still working on it, still imperfect the way all real families are imperfect, but honest with each other now in a way they were not before, and honest with me too. Now, before you go, I want to hear from you. Tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city down in the comments. I promise I read everyone, and it means more to me than you know to see how far this story has traveled. And if you love your grandmother, if she has ever been the one person who showed up for you when nobody else did, do me a favor. Hit that like button for her. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I have more stories to tell you, and I'd love for you to be here for them. And share this with someone who needs to hear it today, someone who has a grandmother worth calling, or someone who needs to remember to answer the phone when a child whispers their name. Thank you for sitting with me today. I'll see you in the next one.